It's your boy, Tony Ortiz, back again with another This Week in Brave Exvius. We're here on April 5th, 2023, and last week was a tough one. It is what it is. It's up. I stand by everything I said. Um, but in the interest of being productive, I feel like we should probably just try to talk about the game. So this week is a pretty good week to do that. We've got a couple new units. Neither one of them is any good. So just to go over them real quickly, we got our last well from JP. Go ahead and check that out. He's got a 500% leader skill for ice units. And also JP Anniversary, I believe, is his tag. Doesn't really matter because there's not enough good ice units in the game. Even on Global, where we have another ice unit or two that are decent, that's not enough to fill out a whole team and actually take it to trials and do well. You can take it to trials, but it's not good enough to take it to Clash or DB and do some work. Then we have Roko, who is whatever. There's a couple fights. They're pretty easy. A new Reagan, you can farm him up for free, EX3, as you have with the last few months. There's been one of these. But, that's pretty much it. And this is kind of a prime time to talk about what's going on in the game. We've also got a new month notice, but I don't really think there's too much to go over there. And I want to show you a follow-up statement that Gumi made about the Dark Visions issue. And I believe it's this right here. Yeah, okay, so. And you're probably wondering, why is there another game on the screen? Well, it's going to come in. We're actually going to use a second instance here to kind of demonstrate some of the things that we're going to be talking about today. Some little visual aid action. But let's just go over this first. So this is typical Gumi fashion, right? So they respond to an issue much later than they should. So like 3 or 4 days, you'll be left in the dark. Maybe a whole week, you'll be left in the dark. They're not active on social media, and they are not active communicating in-game. So we're kind of left to wonder as players, and that's we'll talk about it in more detail later, why that's not a good thing, especially when you run a business like this. However, oftentimes what happens is they put out a statement has zero information. They say, we heard that this doesn't work, we acknowledge that it doesn't work, or whatever, and then we're working on it. That's almost always message one. And then message two is, after listening to the feedback of our players, we've decided to do what we should do in the first place, what we should have done, and then we're going to give you compensation that's going to be nowhere near how big of the screw up that happened. And then we're not also going to put to bed any concerns or cautionary thoughts you might have about this happening in the future, because we just can't promise it, which is, I guess, good in some aspects. You know what you're dealing with, but also discouraging over a long period of time. So yeah. This one is especially poor because they kind of fail to be honest, and I don't know if it's out of ignorance or if it's out of if it's tactical. I don't work there, but I can tell you this: this statement should not come unless you are actually confident that the problem is solved. And my biggest issue with this statement here is not letting people getting away with cheating. You can watch last week's episode about my thoughts on that. Nothing's changed. I'm pretty consistent when it comes to that. I think it's bad for the game's overall health. Even if I wasn't playing, I would say this is a bad business decision. If I was on the executive board, if I was a programmer, if I was a manager, if I was in any part of the company and I saw this, my confidence in our product would be lowered. That's not changed. But I'm going to draw your attention to this line right here. The issue has been fixed with the version update on March 23rd. This is 100% false. The issue and the way it was accomplished, the easiest way to accomplish the bug or the exploit or whatever, the glitch, whatever you want to call it, has been patched. But the actual root issue, which is the ability to take an extra party member overlapped on top of another party member, but still use their full action kit and so on, is not fixed. There are screenshots of it from after this notice and this patch. If you want to go seek those out, please by all means go ahead and do that. I'm not going to discuss anything else about it because I don't want people to do it. Obviously, but it just has to be stated because this is false. So the main issue I have with this statement is it's false. Now, if you don't know if everything's fixed or not, your best course of action, in my opinion, and I'm not a PR person, I don't have a degree in media relations. However, I'm not an idiot, and I talk to people every day, and one of my strengths is communication. Okay. I've met a lot of people with communication degrees that are absolutely terrible at communication. So let's just throw this out here. Okay. If you don't know for sure, if you've not QA tested, bug squashed this, hit the milestone on getting this fixed, whatever industry term you want to use, you come out and say, we have fixed the issue that we were aware of. However, please continue to report related problems so we can continue to investigate and patch those issues out. That's all you have to do. It only takes a couple lines to change the tone and the effectiveness of any communication, especially a written one. Okay, because written communications, there is no context, there are no emphasis on any of these words. There's no pacing or cadence to a person that a person would have speaking to you. So when you do written communication, you have to be 100% on top of it and make sure that this is correct. And I mean, this could be translation. Okay, now if the person who's writing this is running it through one of the translators and the translator doesn't make a lot of money, doesn't care about their job, doesn't go back and get the nuance of the conversation to translate it properly, you're going to end up with a sloppy translation. I mean, we're playing a Final Fantasy game here. Look at some of the Final Fantasies we've had over the years. Like my favorite game, Tactics, is a great example. Whether you like War of the Lions or not, you can't deny that the job of translating the words was absolutely 5 times the level that the actual regular original release got. Whether you like the stylization of it or not is subjective. But the accuracy, the amount of effort that went into it to make sure that it was all proofread and there weren't any of these errors. And remember back in the day that those, even with a handheld title, you couldn't just patch the game like willy-nilly. It still costed a lot of money. It's like patching something on Xbox or PlayStation now. Every time you patch the client or your game, you pay a fee to those companies. So you definitely want to hold off and make less updates and you want to make them bigger updates, so that you don't get charged every time you have a title update. And it happens in software right now with Android. It's usually very, very inexpensive, if it costs anything at all, depending on your deal with Google and if you use the self publishing or whatever. Apple, different story, but this is, unfortunately, again, a failure of communication. We're going to talk about some of the aspects that you need to actually do to run the business. But I wanted to talk about the game this week because this kind of thing is a symptom of the actual problem with the company. And I don't work there. I'm not inside. So all I can do is extrapolate off of what information we observe as public people and as players of the game, consumers of the product, if you will. Let's just break it down into business terms. So this does not instill confidence, right? Now, if this is a publicly traded company and I see this and I'm experienced with the product, I'm not just an evil investor with no care in the world about what I'm actually investing in. I see this, I see the poor communication, my confidence goes down. So I can only imagine what the consumers of the product's confidence will do when they see this here. And the reason I have a little word thing set up over here is because I don't have anything prepared for this, but I've been talking about doing kind of like a state of the game, like an annual or biannual state of the game video separate from the weekly show at some point in the future, right around or after anniversary. And I figured what we might want to do as we're talking about this kind of stuff today is write some of the stuff down and maybe build an outline for that later. And then maybe what we can do is condense what we talk about today into like a more easily consumable um, video later. Um, so I have everything disabled. There's no alerts or anything on. So, and I'm not going to be fielding a ton of questions if you're watching this live. But if something comes to mind, please leave a comment, or hit me up in Discord, and let me know like if there was a point that I didn't cover that you think needs to be addressed, or you wanted to add a thought or detail towards some of the things that we talk about today, or maybe you just want to tell me I'm wrong and I'm an idiot, and that's totally fine too. But just throw any kind of communication down in there. If things come up in the chat, I will try to work them in if they make sense to what I'm talking about. But a lot of times with streaming and doing these things live, you get a lot of input that's like 2 or 3 minutes behind, or you've already covered, and so on. And I just don't want to get derailed by that kind of thing. But yeah, so lastly, like this is kind of like the downhill course of the game in general. Um, and again, that's not to say that it's not going to turn around, but just like seeing things 6 months in advance, not really understanding why they're making the meta calls they're making, not understanding why they're doing the business that they're doing, and then like trying to figure out what are the causes. That's kind of like where we are, and this is just like the biggest, most obvious problem that kind of shows like they can't fix the game in one of the most important modes, whether you play it or not. And we're going to talk about that in detail. As a regular player, whether you care about a high DV score or not, it doesn't just not matter for you. Okay, we're going to talk about why DV being legitimate matters for the game. If they close up shop tomorrow because nobody's spending any money on the game, you don't get to play the game either if you're free to play, or whatever. So, and that's why we're here this week, and this one's going to be a long one, so strap in. It's already, we're already over 10 minutes into this. So that's what I saw yesterday, and I thought, I've been busy this week. I've been running around. I haven't been busy for a while. So I don't know why, but when I have a ton of things to do, that's when my brain starts ramping up to handle all of it. And then the gears start turning. I do my best work when I have a deadline, when there's a crunch, and then I get it done early, and so I can kick my feet up, right? But when I don't have anything to do, when my hands are idle, that's when I don't make a lot of progress. So with this week and being a bit busier than average, and like running around and doing things and having to do things and having things planned, the last couple of days my brain's been kind of going over and over about especially after I saw this. I thought about it all day yesterday. Not like deep thinking, but it was in the back of my mind whenever I had a few minutes. I was like, I wonder what's going on over there. I wonder what the philosophy is behind, the way the company works. And it's such a weird situation. So first, let's break down the actual business situation first, because before we even talk about the game or the game direction or the philosophy or how it makes money or how the business operates, let's just talk about the actual business situation, because a lot of people don't understand what's happening and why things are happening the way they're happening. And I actually don't fully understand it either, because again, not working there, whatever, you won't know for sure unless you talk to a former employee or several employees. You definitely want to make sure you corroborate people's stories, and all that. But let's talk about the overarching theme here, because of the way the business is set up, because I think it's important to understand these kind of things. So the Final Fantasy property, the IP. So we'll just put here Final Fantasy IP is owned in whole by Square Enix. Okay. We'll just use a abbreviation. Okay, so they own everything. So not only do they own the old units that you know and love from all the different series, they also own every original character that Gumi creates. They own the sprites. They own exclusive publishing rights and licensing rights to all that stuff. So if they want to give FFBE characters out to some other company, and Gumi doesn't want to do that, Square Enix can absolutely 100% override them, because they own the intellectual property. They might not be able to hand them the asset that Gumi owns, depending on the relationship between Gumi as the developer and Square Enix as the publisher. So let's put that out there. Okay, they are the publisher. You know, I should probably make this font a little bit bigger. Let's go up to 14, and then it should stay 14, right? Yeah, okay. Then we'll go this. This is a very important relationship to understand that I think a lot of people that don't know shit about the way the video game industry works really need to pay attention to. It's a very complicated relationship. You know, if you don't watch a lot of or listen to a lot of video game news, you probably won't know the main differences between these two very, very important designators. And sometimes they're the same. So, you know, sometimes like Microsoft owns the studio that's making the game for them, and they also own the intellectual property, and they own both. And or maybe the studio is actually a first party in-house studio under their name. Maybe it's another studio they acquired, and that, you know, they report to them, but they have some functionality that's independent from their parent corporation, and so on and so forth. So let's like understand this relationship first. So Square Enix is the publisher in this instance. They are not the developer of the game. So nobody who works directly or contracted to Square Enix Limited or whatever they are in the United States or Japan works on this game. Okay, like they don't program, they don't code, they don't make any decisions directly related to what's happening in the day-to-day game that we have, that we experience. The only things they may or may not do are release certain IPs to be added into this game or charge a fee for them. So like before, Square Enix sold off a lot of their Western-based IPs like Deus Ex and Tomb Raider and so on. If Gumi wants to put Lara Croft in the game, as they did twice, they can go to Square Enix as their publisher and say, hey, we want to do this. They'll probably get a much better deal, and they don't have to negotiate with another third party. Okay. Now, if Square wants to put in something that, or if Gumi wants to put in something that's not owned by Square into this game, when Square's the publisher, now you have a three-way dance. Okay, so you've got to go. Let's say they want to put Sonic in the game. So now Gumi has to either go to Sega themselves, or they have to ask Square Enix to go to Sega and ask to purchase the rights to be able to put the unit in the game. Okay, and then, even if they agree to that and they agree on a price and it's all signed and sealed, it doesn't mean that Sega has to send them an asset that works in the game. You know, there are going to be a lot of instances where Gumi's going to be responsible for developing that asset themselves, and then they won't even be able to necessarily reuse it later down the line, depending on the licensing agreement that is reached. So the reason you don't usually see licensing across publishers, not developers, but publishers, is because of the nuances between how detailed those negotiations are for licensing rights. You know, if you're from North America, you probably are familiar with like the way the Marvel franchise was like licensed out to like everyone under the sun until Disney bought Marvel. And then now what Disney's doing is letting those licensing deals expire so that they can make the films instead of Fox and Sony and so on. Okay. Where this gets extra complicated is the in perpetuity part. So again, when you sign a deal like that, say Gumi gets Square Enix to sign a deal, they pay X amount of money, they get Sonic gets put in the game, you get NV Sonic with freaking Brave Shift into gold form, he throws Chaos Emeralds at the enemies or whatever. When they limited time event that's not why they're doing it, okay? So when they pay for the license and they get the asset or whatever they created and all that, they own the ability to publish that asset in this game in perpetuity. Now, depending on the deal, though, they can't necessarily make changes to it after the fact. So, what's a good example of this? Okay, like Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3. It's a fighting game, massively popular. Had two versions made on disc, and then it got a couple patches, and then Disney decided that they didn't want to license Capcom the ability to continue to update the game. Now, what does that mean? That means that Capcom, in theory, could take the game that they had, with the Marvel characters in it, and they could continue to update the game and change like what, different stuff that Magneto did and like the frame data and all that. They could change all that. But they were not going to be able to add more characters in, and thus DLC, charge more money for them. Nor are they going to be able to make a new title with any of those characters in it, or like do any kind of thing that would involve like a title update. So like, they were never going to be able to go to like, say they were at 4.0, they were never going to be able to go to 5.0 necessarily, depending on what their version of that was. If they were going to take the characters in a different direction, the IP holder still usually has a say in that, depending again on licensing agreement. So, Square is who's handling all of this stuff. Okay, Gumi is not necessarily the people who are doing any of the stuff at this level. So if you don't get the collabs you want, and you don't get the units getting the proper, like, amount of units that are in the game and so on, some of that could be up to Square. Okay, it's not necessarily Gumi's decision on whether or not they get to use Xenogears or Dragon Quest or whatever. They might ask for Square to give them those resources, but Square has full refusal on all of that, no matter what. They cannot, like, as long as they own the IP, they can't legally sign it away. Especially in Japan and in North America, the law won't let them do that. They would have to sell it or donate it to public domain. Like, those are their only options. I'm not a lawyer either, but trust me, you can't just give stuff to other companies because there's all sorts of ethical and economic questions that would have to be asked, right? Like, Apple can't just give the design of the iPhone to another company for free. That would raise a lot of questions, like, why is this happening? Do they have some kind of backdoor deal? Are they trying to screw their shareholders over? Like, there's all kinds of stuff that would come up in that kind of situation. Now, when you donate to something to public domain, that's a different story. Okay, so, but like, collusion is the word I'm looking for. So there would be a lot of collusion. Like, are you giving this IP to this other company because somebody from this company owns stock in the other company and you want the stock of that company to go up without having to draw a fee to buy this and that? So, like, Square was never going to give their stuff to Embracer, right? And even if you take a really, really low end deal that undervalues the product, again, multiple different economic regions, Europe, North America, they will all investigate those kind of deals. So you can't just sell something for way more than it's worth. You also, everybody knows that. Like, there's always going to be questions asked, like, oh, is this price inflated? You also can't go in the opposite direction. You can't sell something to somebody else massively underinflated unless you, again, are owning everything. And then in that case, you're not selling it. So, like, Square might not charge Gumi any money at all to use any of their IP. Again, it depends on the deal. But it also might depend on how much of the percentage that they're sharing in revenue. So it could be that Gumi is paying Square a flat amount of money and signing a licensing agreement to use Square's property in their game, which Square then publishes. Or Square might let them have some of the stuff for free or at a massive discount, but then they might take a cut of revenue that it generates. All that is above board. But again, it doesn't change the fact that Square has the right of refusal. So, like, if you're not getting the stuff that you want, it could be on them. It might not necessarily be on Gumi. And this is how complicated this relationship can get, publisher to developer. So, like, if I don't get the Xenogears units I want, that might be that Gumi got the okay to use all the characters in the game, and then they just decided not to make, the units that we want to see. Or it could have been that they wanted to use Xenogears, but Square said, yeah, okay, but you can only use these 3 characters. Or we want you to make this. This approach can be made in the opposite direction. Square might have some kind of new IP that they want to launch. They might hit up Alim and Gumi and go, hey, make this unit and put it in the game. Promotion, we want to promote our new IP. Here's the money to cover your cost of developing it, and then there's no licensing fee or whatever. So all these things can happen in the opposite direction. But what's important to understand is that when the game that we're playing has the Final Fantasy name, there's no way that Square Enix does not have full and 100% control over the intellectual property that is being used in it. Okay. Then, now let's talk about the difference between the two different companies. Okay. So the Japanese version of the game is developed by a company called Alim, and this is not as uncommon of an arrangement as you may think. Okay, so a good example is that's recent is what's the name of that game that it's like Diablo but it's all online. Oh, I can't remember the name of it. That Smilegate makes and that Amazon publishes. I'm blanking on it, but um, Lost Ark, is that what it is? Lost Ark, I think that's the name of it. So this game made by Smilegate, which is a Korean company. They publish it themselves in Korea, but then internationally, Amazon purchased the right to publish it in the rest of the world. Okay, so those companies have to have all kinds of conversations about what's going to happen here and what's going to happen over there, and so on and so forth. Now, sometimes they can be very cut and dry, where Amazon just says, "Hey, we don't want a lag time. You make something new, send it over to us. We'll put it on our servers. We'll put it live. We'll work together with you hand in hand. Good relationship, easy, no fuss. Like let's make some money." And then some of them are much more complicated, and this is what we have here. So, Alim develops the game. Then, after they bug squash, QA fix, and so on, I think they send builds to Gumi, who then adapts the content for the global version of the game and then translates all the text and so on and makes things fit in boxes and whatever. That's really dumbing it down, but that's pretty much how it works. So it's important to understand that that Gumi is also not responsible for a lot of the things that could come into the game that Alim screwed up. So it's if the game has poor coding or a base code, source code, and Gumi is just here to develop the global version of the game, that might be on their control. And they might have to work with that, and that's why they're always asking you for your patience and all this other bullshit. Okay. And I know it's kind of weird. You're like, why are you kind of like giving them the benefit of the doubt? I'm not giving them the benefit of the doubt. I'm doing what's called due diligence. Okay, so I'm trying to say like when we are going to talk about where the company is going wrong, where the game is going wrong, you get the positives first, so they're in your head and you're not biased towards one side. Okay, this is basically if you go to take any literature or writing class. You should be forced to write a position paper at some point, and what they will teach you is that you, anytime you take a position, for it to be qualified and reasonable, you have to actually talk about the opposite position from yours, or all of the opposite positions from yours, if there are more than two, which there are in many cases. And if you can't acknowledge, like the positives of the other position, and then show how the positives of your position outweigh them, you'll never win a debate. You'll never change anyone's mind. You won't teach anybody anything. So this is what we have to do. So I'm trying to explain a lot of these things so that people understand that it's not just bashing the company. It's a lot of this criticism is legitimate. It's qualified. It's coming from people who understand the complex business relationships between these companies, and where the failure points are, where the pain points are. Okay, so Alim does not communicate with us as global players in any way, so there's not really much else to talk about when it comes to them. Suffice to say that we'll just put in here that Alim develops JP version, exports either in full or in part the product to Gumi. Gumi then translates, and in some cases we'll say tertiary development, or no, let's just say additional. I don't want to blow anybody's head up here. And we're going to call it product because that's what it's supposed to be called. Squeenix still publishes both versions of this game. So you have to understand that. And sometimes Gumi or Alan can't change things right away because of this thing. Okay. If Square were to allow Gumi or Alan to publish the stuff on their own, you'd probably see more things get fixed and get fixed in a much faster fashion. However, that would be a much more complicated relationship than one that already exists. The deals that they have for IP would have to be much more like ironclad and not as loose. Square's gonna lose out on a lot of that publishing rights money, which is why they publish stuff without developing it and licensing out their IP in the first place. And then here I'll even pull this up here. We'll just head right on over to here we go. Let's see. I have this here. Okay, so you can see right here. I mean, and it's Wikipedia, but like developer, publisher. Okay, it's a complicated relationship, and we have to understand how that works. You don't even see Gumi listed here, right? But as you scroll down, I'm sure it will eventually. There'll probably be a way to click on something that takes you to the global version of the game. Yeah. Well, and again, this is regular Wikipedia. This is not the actual wiki for the game, but you can see right there what I mean. It's right there in plain English for you. It's again. There are some times where developers will allow their IP to be used and allow the other company to publish it or whatever. But it's pretty rare that happens. All right, let's get rid of this. Okay, so we understand how this works. Hopefully, now this is the business relationship between these companies. What do they want me to put in here? Oh, comments. Okay. All right. So that hopefully has given you, if you're not a business, person, or you don't understand how any of this stuff works, if you don't understand the games industry, hopefully this has shed some light on that. Okay. Let's move along. All right. So, what kind of game is this game? Now there's going to be a couple of questions. So, genre, platform, business model, and then I don't want to. I probably shouldn't include this last one because it probably won't be relevant. Yeah, let's just leave it at this. Okay, so super basic. What kind of game is it? What platforms are it on? How does it make money? There you go. It's pretty simple, right? So genre is exactly what you would think it is. You can invent whatever. Shooter, RPG, action, platforming, immersive sim. There's you can go on and on and on. You could even do VR, rhythm, fashion game. Whatever. And to infinity on that. Okay. Platform. Where is it played? PC, console, mobile, web, you know, physical tabletop game, and on, right? And then business model. Or how does it make money? Because you cannot make a product and give it away for free without supplementing it in some other way. So you can make a product and hand it out for free, the base product, but you have to have something else where people will pay you to be able to keep the lights on, to pay your staff, to, you know, and so on and so forth. Reinvest, redevelop. You can, in theory, have a product that you do make available for free that's subsidized in some way. Maybe you make another super successful product that's massively profitable, and you make a secondary product that is free, pro bono, you know, for the good of society, so on. Or you release things into public domain, right? But if you're going to run a business and you're going to file taxes and all that, you're going to have some kind of way to show at least you know, some kind of profit and loss revenue, you know, like relationship. You know, plenty of businesses can lose money over tons of years and stay afloat. But eventually, if you don't have a way to balance those books, that the wrong debt people call you for your debt at the wrong time, and then that's it. It's all gone. So obviously this is pretty important. So now here's where we go, you know, retail, subscription, or everyone's favorite, microtransaction. Donation based, you know, and you know, and so on. Because, you know, you can have something like what we just looked at, Wikipedia, which is literally just kept alive by donations. Now, no one's required to, and you don't get anything extra for donating, but it is, you know, somebody has to pay, you know, for the server costs and the development. So people just chip in whenever they can and so on, right? So how does it make money? Okay. So let's look at FFB. Okay, obviously, the genre is RPG. There are turns, numbers, you know, stats, all that fun stuff. It's pretty much, you know, and we'll put in traditional. Okay, traditional RPG. So the original Final Fantasy was based off of a tabletop game called Dungeons and Dragons, if you're not aware. That's why there's spell levels and only so many casts per, you know, in rest or whatever, instead of like an MP or magic point stat in the very first game. You can, you know, look up the history of that in your own time. So we'll just go, this is not far-fetched from that, though, and, you know, it mirrors a tabletop paper and pencil game closer than any other genre of video game, so I would say traditional is a fair way to label this. Let me get this a little bit better right there, so you can see the slightly last thing we talked about without platform. Mobile devices. And then we'll put in emulation not discouraged, because they do not threaten to ban your account if you run the game on a device that emulates a mobile device. And that's a double-edged sword, of course, in many ways, which we will cover later. And then lastly is, of course, microtransaction, with some subscription elements. Okay, and the reason we're not putting this in here as a subscription, you know, because, like, you know, you have your monthly packs that are always there, your Crest Pass, your Final Lapis, or whatever. Those things are just microtransactions that are more reliable. You know, the price is consistent. There's, you know, you get a bonus occasionally. You can't really compare it to the subscription cost of, say, a Final Fantasy XIV or World of Warcraft, where access to the game and playing is gated by an initial startup cost and then a subscription. and so on and so forth. Okay, so we'll throw that in there, but that's really just like some throwaway words just to cover that. And why are we defining this? It's because when we talk about the game, we want to compare it to other games. And we want to talk about what's different in the traditional RPG genre versus other genres. Okay? What are the trials and tribulations of making a game of that style versus games of other styles? You know, because we're trying to figure out why are the issues here. Is it related to just the type of game we're making? Are there always going to be more problems when making this type of game? You know, every different type of genre has its own unique challenges, and those are important to acknowledge. Okay, platform. Obviously, this is a huge one. Again, double-edged sword. When you're working on a console, you're very easily. It's very easily to find bugs, easy to squash them and get rid of them when the console's developed for first, because everyone's using the exact same hardware or like one of two versions of the hardware. When you go to PCs and mobile devices, you know, a lot of things get much more complicated. You're working with a lot of different hardware, hopefully running all the same software, but often not. And, you know, the root of a lot of these problems is very, very closely related to that. And then the business model is very important, and we'll talk about that last because it's obviously the elephant in the room. But when you choose a specific business model, you are usually going to limit your options of development based on the model that you choose. Now, sometimes free to play with microtransactions is the way to go for a game. Sometimes initial retail price is the way to go. Sometimes a combination of both is the way to go. It really depends, again, on not only the genre, not only the platform, but the design of the game itself as well. So we want to talk about, you know, why this is relevant and why it may be causing the problems. Or on the inverse, if this is the business model, yet these are the issues, why are these not being addressed? Because with this sort of business model, these issues will counter the business model and, you know, make it an unviable business. Okay? All right, so that's defined. Let's talk about FFBE in detail now. So let's like break this down. All right, so what are we going to do inside the game itself? We have design. That's for sure. So in general, let's go subpoint here. Let's see. We've got units. Okay. We've got, well, here, let's go with, we've got combat. And then we'll come back up here later. Let me scroll down for you. There we go. But then we also have, there's other things. There's exploration. Okay, that's completely different from combat. You'll get into combat while you're exploring, but you know it's much different. Okay, and then what else do we have? Do we have anything else that's not combat in the game? I wouldn't count the chocobo slots or anything like that. Oh, you know what we should do? Let's make a distinction here. Can you not word, please? Undo. Thank you. Okay. Oh, I have to like get down to the, yeah, there we go. Okay. Let's actually get rid of units. Okay. Do we have anything else? I'm trying to think here. Oh, the friend system. The friend system is part of the design. I don't want to dive too deep into like the differences between trials and blah 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 and CAW and all that. That's all part of the actual playing of the game combat. I think there's enough of a difference between PvP and PvE to draw the distinction, because we're going to be comparing it to other games where it's a much bigger element, and like how this gets around some of the challenges, and how it makes some elements of the game worse or better, and so on. But I think that's pretty much it in terms of playing the game. Or I guess you could just one last thing would be inventory and how is it managed. So like inventory and resource management. That's pretty much it. Those are your 5 fundamental things that are in this game. Yeah, because there's no guilds. What other games have that this game doesn't have? Guilds is huge. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it, right? Guilds is what they're missing. We'll talk about the PvP bit. They don't really. It's not real PvP. They don't have real time PvP or even adjustable PvP that people can adapt to. There's a bunch of other things, but those are like the fundamental elements of the design. Again, not the business model, but the design. Okay, and then let's go down to the platform section now. Platform. Now, this probably matters a little bit more. How can we explain this now? So, platform. Okay. Let's break this elements down. So, how do you control the game? Let me scroll for you. Here we go. Okay. So, how does the game control? Now, this could be controller, traditional peripherals. I'm going to spell this shit wrong. Oh, close. E and an A. Touch. Etc. It's important because this, we've talked about it before, changes the way the game is played. If you have to use a touchscreen to play, obviously that's going to have an effect on the game. There's some people that really love a traditional controller, or they like to be able to relax and not be active with their hands, or vice versa. People can't stay engaged with a controller or a keyboard and mouse or whatever. You could even go with VR, right? You can go VR, and add that in. Another way to control the game. Control the game. Okay. I guess we can go back up here and add narrative. Yeah, that's probably a good idea. Let me scroll back up and show you that I've added. We'll add narrative in there. Okay. Right. And then accessibility. And this isn't just in terms of controls, but I mean how broad is the platform, right? So if you only develop for traditional PC, not even different operating systems, less people are going to play your game. One of the big things about mobile games is the ease of accessibility. Everyone has a phone, therefore everyone has a chance to play your game. Not everybody has a gaming PC or even thinks about gaming on their PC, and therefore might not even ever have a chance to stumble across your game and play it, even if it's free, as opposed to the other thing. So. We'll just put that in there. I'm not talking about accessibility in terms of controls, but as a separate thing altogether, accessing the game on the platform it's on, and so on. And then after that would be native to platform incentives. So, if you're on Android, is the Play Store going to recommend your app or not? Are they going to give you incentives to spend money on the game by giving you points that you can turn in for other currency, and so on and so forth? These are not things that are necessary to the business model of your game, but they can increase the revenue or drive certain decisions that get made about where your game is published, therefore, and what platform it's published on, therefore how many people play it, and so on and so on, right? To extrapolate from there. So, wait, yeah. So like examples would be like play points, recommended, or like game feed, stuff like that. If your game is on Steam, it's going to hit a lot more people than on Epic Game Store because of the difference in those platforms, right? If your game is on only Android or only iOS, obviously the amount of people that are going to touch it is going to be smaller, and thus might have an impact on the decisions that get made in the game. All right. And if we think of any more, we'll come back and add them. All right, so now let's go down to business model. All right. Let's try to keep this uniform. Did I? Yeah, I didn't do anything like that. Do this up here. All right. And then the business model. So this is where it gets tricky. There's a lot of philosophy involved in this. So you want to say like after determining the platform or the game design and platform, how to decide on a business model. That's the first thing you have to ask yourself when you're making a product. There's a lot of things that are legacy in the video game industry. You can even go across genres. So if you are a fan of music, there are plenty of people out there that still prefer to buy pressed vinyl records. Okay, this is one of the very first technologies we were able to use in order to own a copy of something. That wasn't like a studio recording or whatever. And there are some people that just prefer the fidelity of that pressed vinyl record as opposed to a tape or a CD or a digital file or whatever. So if the majority of people that like the product like it in a very specific way, i.e. subscription, pay once for the game and I'm out of here, or microtransactions or whatever, that can actually be the make or break for if your game is successful or not. If you try to put out a game that's loaded with microtransactions into a genre of players that hate microtransactions and won't buy it off of principle, no matter how good your game's design is and no matter how many platforms it's available on, you're not going to be successful. I mean, that's just it's common sense, but like it bears repeating because it is so important. And a lot of companies don't take this into account because they're not necessarily thinking about long-term sustainability and viability. It is what it is. This isn't just video games. This is all sorts of products and services. Okay. So, like after you have the product in your hand, a good company will do some market research and decide, okay, how is this best going to work for our product, and keep it successful. Okay. So, that's pretty much it. Like with business model in terms of like, the upfront. Other than that, we would just go into details about all the different stuff, like details about all of the aforementioned options. And I don't think I need to do any of that because I'm sure everybody here has been into a retail store. Everyone's bought some DLC, whether on their console or PC or even their phone. And everyone, of course, if you've played this game before, has at least flirted with the idea of paying like $1 for a microtransaction that's a complete digital item that you'll never get back. And so on. Okay, so then we define all this stuff. This is important and the reason to define this early is you want to think back to these things as we start discussing the game itself. And, we are comparing it to other things, not just other games, but other activities, other venues of entertainment, things like that. Okay, so think about these things that we've just discussed as like the building blocks. Like they're like the Legos that are just laying around, and then the game is the fully assembled Lego kit into like whatever the thing is that you decided to buy. Um, and think about, as we discuss the game from here on forward on its own merits and flaws, think about that same Lego kit that you purchased maybe missing a piece, or missing the instructions, or some of the pieces are the wrong color, or they're not as advertised in the box. Or maybe think about that it's only one part of a 10 kit set and that those other kits aren't released yet. And if you want to have the full Lego town, you have to wait and buy the other kits later. So think about that as like something tangible to maybe help you if you're not like if you're not if you're not great at like dealing with high level, not high level, but like high overview, like macro stuff. If you're a much more micro thinking person, like this and this, instead of hot, like like up above, and like the above concepts where you're looking down at like all these giant things that are hard to put together, because it's much harder to put together like a small piece. Like say you're putting together a traditional size Lego kit, but then you have like hands that are like 3 times the size of the average person. You're gonna have some difficulty. So like everybody thinks differently. That's fine. These are just, again, like some concepts to kind of help you like circle back around and go, oh, maybe this decision was not a great decision based on how the platform that we're on works and the limitations of touch-based controls, just as an example, right? Okay, there you go. All right, let's actually talk about the game. That's why everybody's here, right? Okay, so let's define all this other stuff. Traditional RPG. We did it up here. Let's actually cut that out and then paste it down here. All right. So let's go down memory lane here. And the game is 6 years old, at least in global. We'll say global, 6 years old. Quickly approaching 7. Okay. So from there, we have a lot of things to unpack, right? So changes in direction, leadership, and commonly interactive staff known to the player base. And I will just parentheses community for there we go. There you go. All right. So it is what it is. Let's talk about. We can go a lot of different directions here, but we have to cover everything. So I'm not going to be worried about missing too many things. We'll circle back around and reorganize this if we have to. So when you have a game this old, there's going to be a lot of things you have to deal with: legacy issues and legacy players. Oh, I missed an S there. And balancing the needs of the platform, business model, and the community with the game as the interface between the two. Okay, so this is the most difficult thing for a lot of people to understand, is that without the metrics in front of you, you never really can know, and you can only guess, or at least make a decent estimate of how many problems there are behind the scenes that are rooted from how long the game's been in operation, what the limitations were when they started, like what engine it's in, how good the code is, how adaptable it is, like, all that. Then you have to balance. Then you have to think about like how many players have been playing this game for forever. Are they the driving force behind what gets done? If they are they good at driving the game in the right direction? Because there's lots of legacy players and lots of games that don't drive games in the right direction. And there's lots of legacy players that do drive games in the right direction. And, some games become more successful and some don't. There are games that don't listen to the legacy players at all, don't give a shit about them. They're like, hey, whatever, who cares? Like, you have made money off of them for 5 years, and then they quit the game. They're never coming back, don't care. Not even worth investing in trying to get them back. So there's all, and they do that, obviously, through the game and the business model and the platform that it's on, right? So maybe it's more difficult for somebody to play the game because they're not at their PC as much. If you're able to release a version of the game that's on a mobile platform or a portable console, and you're also able to sync their saved data or their old profile or so on, so they don't have to start over from scratch. If you're able to do those two things, then you're balancing this kind of thing and trying to get that revenue back, into your circulation. Okay, so there's lots of things that are more complicated and get more complicated quickly the older a product gets and the broader the community becomes. Okay, so let's just kind of like acknowledge that. So and then again, this is just talking about, this is the way it is. No game is exempt from this. Um, and you can learn from the way that other games have developed. I mean, ideas get borrowed all the time, solutions get borrowed all the time to problems, and it's just the competitive nature of this like industry. Okay, all right. So the game is a traditional RPG. We talked about that. The business model is microtransactions. Platform is mobile. Okay, so what are going to be the main hurdles? Okay, so let's talk about advantages and disadvantages. So we'll be like, okay, what are the advantages that MFB has in this marketplace? Okay, first thing that comes to mind, beloved IP. Okay, so they have a universally beloved IP. They have a big access to it, and that's going to pull people in on its own. They have creative license. Now, this could also be a detriment. We're going to put it in the disadvantages list too. They have creative license to do a lot with these different characters. A lot of their sprite design is they just do it in house. They have the right to use the IP. They use it the way they want, and this can be a really good thing because it can get people hyped up to see their favorite characters reimagined, redrawn, and they can also work into the detriment as well if you don't do a very good job of it. So we'll put that down here. Or we could do like a double edge. So like let's do like a disadvantages. We can do like neither an advantage or a disadvantage, an attribute that ends up breaking even. What would we even call that? What's the right word for that? Let's call it oh, that's with a UT now. That's a good way to do it. All right. Oh, we gotta get. There we go. Okay. The pixel art style is universally beloved by gamers. Like they still make games to this day in pixel art. that sell really well and do fantastic. We'll just put this little caveat in here. In this genre, you know, or traditional RPGs. You know, maybe there's some Call of Duty players out there that only play Call of Duty or whatever that are like pixel art stupid. But anybody who's going to touch this game and actually like the mechanics of it, you know, is going to absolutely love the art. That's for sure. Now we'll put here in the elements here that TRPG gameplay can be huge because there's people that are specifically looking for it. They're not a big fan of action, especially on this platform. You know that. So I'm just trying to get my hoodie's hood out of my back. There we go. All right. That could be huge for people who are looking for it. It could be a huge turnoff for people that aren't looking for it, right? So it's a divisive style of game. Whereas, like, I don't know, what's like a universally Minecraft style of like action is probably, well, even then, no, because you can go to third person and stuff, and the game's really balanced around being able to do stuff in either view. So I mean, I'd probably go with that as just like the generic example of like, you know, gameplay style that pretty much nobody has a problem with. But there's first person and third person shooter people that will argue back and forth about which one is better, and even if a game can do both, you know, so on and so forth, right? Okay, so um, here's a major disadvantage: the microtransaction business plan. This is a disadvantage inherently, no matter how fair or honest your microtransaction plan is, because of the ill-gotten gains and unethical practices of other companies utilizing this specific business plan. Okay, so when you're analyzing a business plan and you're trying to like go over like if this is a good fit for you or not, you definitely have to weigh um, the the response to just even picking this business model to begin with. Okay, let's take what's a example that's going on right now. Diablo 4, right? Okay, so Diablo 4 is coming soon, and people really want to know about the microtransaction system, okay? And I think they've said, like, oh, it's only going to be cosmetic or whatever. But you look at the same IP developed by, you know, the same publisher and their in-house owned company, Blizzard, that, you know, with the mobile game that came out, what, like over a year, almost a year ago now? And how predatory that microtransaction system was, how unethical and how terrible it is. You know, there's thousands of hours of videos on YouTube that you can check out, you know, and then like go through the actual math of like how much money you would have to actually spend to reliably get this, that, or the other. And yeah, it's pretty ridiculous. And that is weighing on the minds of people who are going to pay for this retail box, you know, one-time cost game, but then it has this stuff sprinkled in. And even if the company comes out ahead of time and says, hey, we're not going to do any of that, the consumer, us, still is very right, in my opinion, to be cautious about that. It's very, very interesting that people don't understand how badly a negative reputation can affect the product. You know, like if I hear that this game's coming out and it's not particularly a genre I enjoy, I might still check it out anyway because I love gaming, right? But if I hear that it's riddled with microtransactions that are unfair, I won't even look at the product. Okay, I won't even look at it. Now, can you argue that you should always be looking at, you know, whatever thing it is and making your own opinion? Of course. But the fact of the matter is, human beings do not have that much time to investigate every single little tiny thing. So we take people who have similar interests to us, or trusted sources, or reputable people that, you know, have traditionally been right in the past and it's been, you know, verifiable and stuff like that. And we pull that into our own calculus that we're doing up here and thinking and deciding, hey, is this worth my time or not, right? Your friend might recommend you watch a TV show or a film that they saw and they really enjoyed and they thought it was very good. And you might have very similar tastes to that friend, and that might be the thing that makes you go see it. Or, you know, take the time to watch it or whatever. But at the same time, if that same friend who you do, you know, have all these things in common with recommends a genre of something that you absolutely can't stand, are you going to be more likely to check it out? That's a questionable, you know, situation. Even if I get a great recommendation from somebody, but it's for something that I normally, you know, can't stand, I'm still not that likely to go and look into it, you know. And some people's peer pressure, you know, uh, limits are higher than others, right? But you know, I personally understand that when I recommend, hey, you guys should go watch this new season of Star Trek. It's amazing. That if you're not into sci-fi, my recommendation, even if you like a lot of the same stuff that I do, in general, is not necessarily going to be the thing that tips you over into the next you know, space where you would go and check it out, right? So these things are important to think about because you're already kind of setting yourself behind the market when you pick a business plan the consumers don't like. Um, and you have to try to overcome that with other parts of the game, right? So your beloved IP and art style. Maybe people will put up with this because they love our IP, right? Like Diablo's betting on the fact that people love Diablo so much that they'll put up with it and pay the money and keep paying the money, even though there's plenty of other products that are similar and less expensive and higher quality in terms of, you know, mechanics, design, graphics, you know, and so on, and then they don't have this business model, right? Now, and that's to say, I don't know about four. We'll have to wait and see, right? But you know, I'm just saying, like, compare like Diablo 3 to some of the games we have now, right? Compare, um, you know, older games to newer games and so on. And there's often times where the older games are much better than the newer games. You know, a series that I'm playing on the channel right now, Mass Effect, the first two games most people would say are much better than the third, and then those are much better than the fourth, right? Or well, the between game that we're not actually going to give a number, but again, case by case basis, it's important to take all this stuff in. Okay, what are some other things that are a disadvantage that FB has? Poor communication. And let's just not even talk about the way it was in the past. It's not relevant to what's going on in the future. It's been over a year since the communication model has changed, and it hasn't worked. So, somebody coming in right now today and says, "Hey, I want to start playing this game. What are the things I need to be aware of?" Poor communication is it. Um, the communication we get from the developers in game is garbage, as you can see on the screen right here. Um, and the communication we get on their social media is also garbage. They don't answer any questions. They don't do anything except for um, the lowest common denominator social media manager stuff. So, oh, hey, maintenance is starting tonight at this time. Oh, hey, maintenance may go longer for 2 more hours. But you can also see that message in game. There's no real reason to follow them on social media for almost any thing at all. You know, like there's not Reddit AMAs. There's not you know, interactions where you can actually talk to someone that's involved with development or whatever, um, and so on and so forth. Like they have a live stream once a month where traditionally, since they've started it, we do not get good information. We get like 10% of the information we really need, and oftentimes it's no more information or the exact same information that we will get in game in 2 days after they air that content. And I think that that's fundamentally, I'm going to roll that into the poor communication. I can contrast this with basically any good game that does like dev streams. Um, okay, here you go. Here's a game that's older than this game. It's called Warframe. It's on PC and consoles. Okay, and it's like a third-person sci-fi action like game. It has RPG elements. It's a lot of fun. It has a lot of bloated mechanics and overdone stuff. They've made a lot of mistakes, but what they have done since pretty much the beginning is they've at least once a quarter, maybe sometimes once a month, they have a dev stream where the developers, like the head of the product, the main product manager, the main systems person, the main sound and art design guy, and like the community manager would all come on and they would have a presentation about this is what we're working on, this is what we're doing, these are the mistakes we made, this is the things we're trying to do to correct these things, and you know, we appreciate your input. They're giving away in-game currency, you know, to anybody who's watching. Once Twitch had drops, they would have drops for you tuning in, you know. And then they have community nights where like once a week the community manager and community reps will like jump in the game and actually play with people. They'll chat about some other stuff. They'll share community art and so on and so on and so on. Okay, so some games get this perfectly right. And look, that game, I love it to death. I don't play it anymore. I occasionally will jump back in, but just as an example, I appreciate the people that work on it, and I give that game the benefit of the doubt a lot of the times, even when they do things that I don't agree with or don't like, or change the fundamental design of this or that or whatever, because the communication is very good. The people are personable. They're nice people. They respect the community, and even when they make mistakes in the community, when they like take sides when it doesn't make any sense, or they or whatever other chicanery happens, it's good to have a personal relationship and good communication because it will overcome a lot of other issues. It will keep people's faith intact and their optimism high. And that's really good, especially if your business model is very speculative, like microtransactions, okay? If you sell somebody the product in a retail sense and you make the money up front, the argument is that, well, at least you made back X amount or whatever, right? So like if you release a blockbuster film and it sells 10 million tickets, I mean you did an amazing job, right? It makes $100 million on a budget of 20 million or whatever. It's amazing. Now if that movie, that's an amazing success, whether the movie sucks or not. Now if the movie sucks, you're probably not gonna be able to make a sequel. Okay, this is coming back into the IP and all that, right? So that's the subtle differences, right? Whereas microtransactions, it's not like if the game is terrible for a year that you can just erase all that and make a sequel. Well, I mean, you could, but it's going to be very difficult. Whereas a lot of other games that are retail based, buy it once and you're done, or buy it once and then buy 2 or 3 DLC packs, which are big expansions. They come around with a sequel. People review it, give you positive reviews. There's a demo, maybe you play it. Oh, they fixed this, they updated that, they changed this. I really like the narrative and the genre. I'm going to give it a shot. Those are things you don't have when you get into a microtransaction style mobile game like this one. Okay. Okay, and advantages. It's doing the thing again. All right, there we go. Advantages, I would say there's a massive library of evergreen content for new players. Actually, we might want to put that in this one, because now that I'm thinking about it, it's got to be terrible to start this game up and see all those trials waiting for you and everything. And then all the story quests and all the chapters. I mean, you can start with chapter 4 right away if you want to, but to go back and actually get all this other stuff, like equip gun or whatever, like you either have to pull the one unit that has a TMR that has it, or you have to sit through this super long fucking quest, and like it takes forever. Espers are like another good example of how that can the legacy content can be a bad thing. For somebody that starts tomorrow, you're not going to get a max Bahamut for a year, and a lot of clears want you to have this extra killers and this break damage. It's a really weird thing to put it in there. Disadvantages. I'm going to actually put this in disadvantages. I can't believe I'm doing this, but lack of meaningful PvP. Now, most mobile games don't do this right and can't do this right because of the limitations of the platform. But I mean, this is a turn-based game, so in theory it should be much easier for them to do this because latency and input delay is not a thing in terms of like your opponent can't like negatively impact it. And I'm thinking about now, like, yeah, so like doing touch inputs is another thing. Let's put that in the disadvantages. Limitations, touch-based input with no in-game, or with few in-game workarounds. All right. Oh, and let's add this one. Let's add this to a huge advantage. Emulation encouraged. Macros can fix issues, or we'll say flaws, in game design. Stats. What else is there? Variance. Okay. So then in the either way column, I put the overly complicated game systems. Now, some of the minutia of an overly complicated game system is what pulls a lot of us in, and then it also pushes a lot of people away. In certain aspects. So like, there's just so much to know about this game. Like, breaks and perils, amps, fields, and all the way the different stats work. Like evade, provoke, nephesite / magic absorb. Then the variance differences between two hand, dual wield. The weapon. The weapon enhanced cap, the base stat cap, the buffs will over, all that blah 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 blah. Like, so all that together, the espers and so on. You're probably used to espers being very effective, and in this game they're just like usually only used for a field and for the passive stats that they give you, which is like the antithesis of how they're used in most Final Fantasy property. So overcomplicated systems, really cool, keeps it interesting for us veterans, but like very very hard to get into. Like, it's very hard to get someone into this game and like not just go, hey, just go watch Sinzar, Libdilly, Gertz, Cloud, whoever, Spidey, like whoever, just go watch them and like follow what they do. Because in order for me to explain all this crap to somebody, it would take forever. And then also, they have to not only take in all the information, but process it all and then trial and error. Because, like, if you don't know what like to do on most bosses, you have to just smash your head up against the wall until you figure it out, which is not something a lot of people want to do, frankly, because the path to victory is not visible to them, right? It's not immediately visible. Like, if you can see what you have to do in a platformer to get to the end, and it's just down to your execution, that's something that a lot of people can wrap their head around very easily. But when you're just, like math numbers flying across the screen and like all this other stuff, a lot of people don't see the path to victory, and they feel like they're just running into a wall over and over, and that's that can be a big issue. I'm gonna put one more thing. I'm gonna put down here in the double-edged sword category is weekly content releases. So this is actually something that can be really great, but also something that can be a huge detriment. And let's talk about this now, because this is a very important point. I've never played another mobile game that has a weekly content drop in any way. At least I've never played one like and stuck with it for like more than like 1 or 2 sessions. Okay. Um, and that's again, it goes into that overload aspect, but not just from like the cost angle, but from like the mental stack angle, right? Um, and in fact, to balance it, you almost have to have like usable versus garbage, and that's never anything you want to do. If you're standing in front of a gacha machine, the little prize machine where you put in a quarter and you spin the thing and you get a random little orb, which is what these games are named after, spiritually. You only have so many spins before you go, fuck it, I'm not going to get what I want, I'm out of here. And that kills the revenue and limits the revenue on the business model for that. That's why you'll see a lot of games institute like, if you do this many spins, you get this for free. So our equivalent is the pity tickets in the game. So like, if you come over here to the banner for Last Well or whatever, and you go down here and you look at the treasure summon or the step up. Where's the step up? Okay, so you get this little ticket on the bottom, and then if you get X amount of these tickets, you can trade those tickets in for a copy of the thing that you're trying to get through the random system. Um, you know, I guess we'll put that in parentheses afterwards. And one of the fundamental flaws with that is that if you have multiple levels, you clash with the other stuff that makes the game great. So, like, if you come out with, I don't know, Bartz from Final Fantasy V, and he's complete garbage and unusable in the actual functional parts of the game where you play the game, and his cost is the same as Paladin Sylvie, who's been in the game for much longer, usable in almost all content, carries most of it, you're really alienating that player that loves Bartz. Because it's one thing to have Bartz and look at a little, pixel art of Bartz, and it's another thing to actually use them in the game that you're playing. So that disconnect is oftentimes a very huge detriment that's separate even just from the microtransactions themselves. So I would put like the disconnect from game balance to any advantage. So when they put something new and interesting into the game, like a Magnus ability on, I don't know what, like Melissa or whatever, but you can only use it once, so it's completely terrible for Clash of Wills where you'd have to use it twice because that's the way Clash of Wills is designed to have two sets of bursts. You're literally you're taking something cool that would have been an advantage and something neat that the kit may have that's unique, and you're almost like teasing people with it. Like, here's the carrot on the stick, and then you pull it away. And that's an intentional design, which the company's told us several times. Like, they've intentionally designed it that way. Okay, it's a bad design, but they decided it was what they wanted to do, and they did it in spite of it being bad and the community not liking it. So that's like a disadvantage where that disconnect is not observed or like designed around. The music, I guess I'm just going to put up here because a lot of the songs are from other games or just reworked to be in this game. What else? Advantages, disadvantages, double-edged swords. Disadvantage, social system is bad. Or, well, it's poor design. Oh my god, turn off this stupid undo automatic, thank you. Okay, let me scroll down for you here. Alright, so, the lack of guilds. The way the friends list works, or it fails to work, all the time. And it hasn't been addressed in 6 years. It's very difficult to interact with your friends in this game, and especially with no meaningful PvP. And, I'm not a big fan of gating like ridiculously good stuff behind PvP because I don't always want to engage in it. But it's much harder to design a game that keeps people engaged for longer when that just is completely removed. I think Final Fantasy XIV is a good example of this. The PvP is not great, but the rewards you get from it are easily obtainable if you just grind it, and it doesn't take that long. And the reward is, if you do enjoy the content, there's always going to be like a steady flow of people coming in to do it because there's that little actual real reward, that they're going to do to get it. Finding that balance is very difficult. It took them a long time to do that, but I think they're there now. Like where you farm PvP in Final Fantasy, there's some decent rewards, and it's going to fill up the matches for people who actually enjoy it. The game I mentioned before, Warframe, was trying to do this for years and eventually just gave up because they couldn't accomplish it. And that's, I think, a net negative. Um, but it's also good that it's not like the game is still has enough strength to survive without it. So like, can something be done? Of course it can, but it's also palatable that it's on the back burner, I guess, is a good way to put this. Okay. But the social system in general is poorly designed. So like, even if you're going to let the friends list function the way it does, not like having like a guild system where you can like join together with like 49 or what other people or whatever and constantly have their units available. I mean, ask content creators when they make content for this game like how hard it is to try to find people on their friends list, that like have the right builds so they can go and do this thing and show other people how to do it. And then the other people will watch the video and be like, I don't have anybody on my friends list that I can borrow even that unit from, or the one guy I do never shows up, and it's like it's just a terribly designed social system. Um, so let's see here. What else? I apologize for the audio, of course. I unfortunately don't own my own space, so I'm kind of screwed when it comes to that. Hmm. Let's see. What else can we put in here? Um. Oh. End game content. Is scarce. Yeah, again, apologize for the audio here. Nothing I can do about it. Um, let's see. And then there's plenty of subpoints where we can go into on that as well. And abandoned content is probably another good one to put in here. Like, even when they have a good idea, like adding Clash of Wills bosses to Chamber of the Vengeful, then they just decide to not do it. So even when they do come up with some good ideas, to not follow through with them because they're either too difficult to implement or whatever is it is what it is. And we can come back and add more stuff. Oh, here's a good one. Usually respects your time. This is the whole reason I even came back to this game in the first place. So now that auto battle is in, the ability of this game to have like a few things to do and it only taking you 20 to 30 minutes so that you can go live your life is a huge advantage. And then there's energy potions. If you want to sit in the game all day, you can do that or whatever. So I think that's a huge strong suit. It's kind of like why I came back to this game. So I played a different game for a couple years, and the guild I was in was merging, and like the person that was on my raid team quit, and I just kind of was like wondering why I was wasting a couple hours on like a weekend day. When I lived in a really fun place to be, instead of going out and doing things, why was I wasting like why was I trying to plan my night around like an hour or 2 hour long raid session in like a mobile game? Um, and so when I looked for something else to play, mostly for downtime at work or downtime traveling or whatever, I was looking for something that like I could play a lot if I wanted to, but also I could like log on once in that day, literally one time, and spend like 20 minutes, burn all my resources, and then not like be left in the dust. And this game actually does a really good job of that. Like if you want to do like a complicated trial, yeah, you're gonna have to sit down and like figure it all out. But and it's gonna take time. But most of the stuff that's important like that is evergreen. So like you can just ignore it for a month and then sit down and do it later when you have time. Um, Now, this isn't the case with everything. You know, we have some of these fights that are limited, like the ones that unlock the extra ability. So, like for like Sephiroth, or I think Dark Reign also. You know, that those not coming back kind of sucks. I think JP has a way to get around that, and we might get that at some point. Um, but yeah, there's like a lot of weird stuff like that. Um, that is the exception to the rule, but in general, they don't they like learn from their mistakes in this regard. So like if you go back to like events from like year 2, year 3, and so on, there's like these pieces of gear that were completely unique, like for a long time, like the reflect ring, like you know, Dragon Brush. They even as recently as a couple years ago sold Paws of Prosperity, which they didn't rerun this year, which I think is a huge mistake because there's not really much you can do with two of those. But like people who don't have one are at a huge disadvantage, and it's really weird. Like they made this mistake and then like stopped, uh, you know, like making anything equivalent to help people out. Um, for a long time. So like now you can like the reflect ring, you know, you can have an Esper that casts it, which is decent. You might have to build like what's up, man? You might have to build like, you know, a build around it and all that to be able to cast it off the evoke, but you know, mm, for the most part the game respects your time. For the most part. You know, there's going to be those little exceptions, but I think that we're in a space now where especially now with auto battle in for like these weird you got to farm, you know, 300 frags or whatever stuff for like the new free unit. Now with auto battle in for this kind of stuff, I think the biggest issue of respecting your time is for the most part resolved. And like I said, they haven't made anything that's been like a limited gear drop item that's like relevant to the game since Paws of Prosperity. And even then, Paws of Prosperity was a mistake that was only made like once in like the 2 or 3 years after that. You know, yeah, I think since between like Dragon's Brush and some of maybe like the element weapons that were event only and Reflect Ring, there was like two years or so where like they didn't really do that, make that mistake. Pause of Prosperity was they made that mistake again. People hated it, and then they haven't made that mistake since. So we'll go with that. I'm trying to think of anything else. I'm sure there's more stuff that you know we've probably glossed over or that I've forgotten that we could put in these categories. But like this is just kind of like an exercise, you know, like what are the positives, what are the negatives, what are the things that can go either way about this game, and trying to figure out like why decisions are being made, or like at least trying to qualify like what the right decisions are, and then trying to bridge the gap between okay, we know what they should do, and the developers probably also know what they should do because they see us talk about it. But why do they continue to not do the things that the community wants? Is it for practical reasons? Is it for non practical reasons? And can we figure that out? Can we reason our way to that? All right. So, let's just talk about some of the fundamental problems that arise from all the stuff we've covered so far. So, issues that arise from conflicts in the game design versus the business plan. All right, so this game in particular has a big problem with power creep. All right, so and since it has this very big problem with power creep, and the business plan is a microtransaction plan, the company is incentivized to creep the game very fast, to FOMO you into not being able to do some of the, again, sparse endgame content. And that's going to supplement their lack of being able to give you a good reason to buy the stuff that is part of the IP that you enjoy, right? So I'm going to put out Paladin Cecil because all the Final Fantasy 4 people who love Paladin Cecil will want to pull on Paladin Cecil. And I'll make him pretty good, so that way there's a reward for them. But then the next stuff that comes out that's from a different game, so like Final Fantasy 5, I'm going to make all those units trash. So those people are not buff them from the JP version, right? So those people will still have to buy it, but they won't be able to use it. And then when I put out the new FFBE, like, story unit, then they'll need that to do this new content, so they'll have to buy that too. That's like the problem that ends up happening when you don't balance the units against themselves, especially for like a unit to last at least like a year or two. So if somebody feels that they got their money's worth, especially if it's a premium, and we'll talk about that, the premium price issue, um, you're going to create a lot of discontent, and discontent leads to people dropping the product, typically. You'll have some people that stick with it, but you'll have a lot of people that just drop it. I think you can look back to the 6th anniversary last year, where a bunch of people who hadn't touched the game in years came back, and they had a really fun month or two, and then we went back down the hill, and we're still going down it right now. So, I think that this is relevant. So the power creep issue is huge. Let me scroll down here. And fixing it by passing on cost to the player base. So instead of fixing the game mechanics and balancing the units, and then allowing everybody to just buy the units that are from the games that they like, or buy new units that they think are cool, they force you into buying units that you don't give a shit about to, make up for the balance of the game, instead of, making a little bit less profit, but then paying people that are better at game design or better at coding the game to make sure abilities work properly, or the bosses have the right amount of health, or whatever, to do that job and make it enjoyable for everyone. So there's that. That's a huge issue that kind of like arises from the game design. And then you can include the leader skill drama and sectioning everybody off into different series, locking you out of playing with the units that you like together. Like if I like this unit from Final Fantasy VIII and this unit from Final Fantasy IV, and they're different elements, and now I can't play with them together ever. Now I know sometimes you're going to have to make some compromises, and it's pretty decent because you might have 2 or 3 NV copies of a unit, and like one might be a tank and one might be a damage dealer, so there might be ways around that. But it's hard enough to balance support versus damage versus whatever else is needed in the game, depending on the meta. Then you add these tag things in, and you make it completely unviable for like different series and different elements to be played together. And you have this whole another level of locking people out of the stuff that they actually want to do, which is like bring my favorite units to stuff and kill it with them, or whatever. So, what's a good way we can summarize that problem? Also, using creep as an excuse to lock players out of the advantages listed above. Using units they like as opposed to having to pay for units that are needed to complete the game, or to complete content. Let's say complete content. All right, so that's kind of like what we're talking about here. The actual monetization model. This is a real word now, right? It's in the dictionary? Yeah. All right. Monetization was not a word when this mobile game shit broke out. I can't remember when it got added to the actual Oxford Dictionary, but it's in there now. Okay, and the inconsistency. Some premiums are worth it, and some aren't. Some regular units are worth it, and some aren't. Poor internal balance. Let me scroll here for you. When you don't balance something internally, it's a much longer bridge for somebody's mind to cross to pay for, a weaker version, or not be paranoid that a better version is going to come out in a month and invalidate their previous purchase. And I think like a lot of times with mobile games, especially, and anything that exists all online, people have been getting burned lately in the last few years, especially. knowing that they're just buying like a license to this product. They don't actually even own the product. There's no resale value. There's no nothing. Like if you own an old copy of Final Fantasy VII for PlayStation 1, it has a tangible real world monetary value, and that value will fluctuate up and down as demand goes up and supply goes down and vice versa. But this is a different animal, right? So like basically these were NFTs before NFTs were marketed as NFTs, right? Like we're logging into somebody's thing, we have a key to our account has stuff on it, but one day they're just going to shut it off. So when the price is so high and the return is so low, at least in terms of tangible value, it has to all be hedonistic return, like you having fun or whatever. That puts a much harder, harsher stress on the dollar that gets spent or the currency that gets spent, on the game. So that's something that it's very difficult to do. I think if you find a game out there that actually balances the microtransaction costs properly, and just doesn't go for the dip and the money, you'll have like a game that'll be the most popular game of all time. But as long as companies continue to just like throw ads up in your face and FOMO you, and as long as they all collude to charge the same amount of money for every transaction, X amount of this and X amount of that, we're just going to be mired in this for forever. That's not a FFBE fault, but it's a fault of like gacha in general. Where FFBE goes wrong is that, when you're paying for the specific unit that came out that week. And you don't know necessarily what content's going to come in the future that might make that unit really good, or they might not be able to that they might not be able to help you in. And that can really affect your purchasing power, right? So like the unknown of future content and the limited time that units will be useful. It's a problem that other games don't have, and this is where I'm going to go to another example to show you what I mean. So this is this other game is Epic 7. Okay, this is what this is on the other side of the screen here. So I'm going to go into the unit section here, and they obviously don't release new units every week. I've, again, never seen another game that does. They might not even do a new unit more than like once a month sometimes. They'll have some collaborations here and there. They'll do some reruns here and there, but that's it. Now, there is evergreen information and evergreen content that everyone pretty much has to get through that you can write a guide around and people can follow 2 years ago to today, and it still works. There's really nothing in FFBE like that whatsoever. Some of the evergreen content you want to go back and do, will have an optimal way to do it, but typically you'll be able to run most of it over with anything. And then you'll get to the mid game and you'll get caught up to the point where you have to actually start buying new stuff because the new content that comes out every week is balanced around the metagame of that day. And all the stuff you had in the past, for the most part, eventually will all be invalidated. And here, when there's an actual hard cap on something, and there's evergreen content that is used in the game, you don't have that problem. You can feel decent about spending a couple bucks to get one of these units in this game that's like useful in like all PvE content no matter what, and that will be usable for years. And even if the game were to change this, it's such a major change that they're going to come out and tell players way ahead of time. So one of the games I'll show you later, which is called Summoner's War, which is older than BE, people thought for like years and years they were going to increase like the level cap or whatever, and they never have, because it would just be a bridge too far. It would basically be like likening it to when BE put NVs into the game. They've went one step farther than like every other mobile game went into that sphere, into literally going up a whole tier where like your old units can't even be upgraded. Well, we have MBAs, but like how many MBAs are useful? Like 1 in 10, so this is another like weird quagmire to be in, and it's very hard to get people to spend the money with a practical thought pattern. Typically, most people who are spending the money are spending it because it doesn't matter, or they're buying the stuff that they like, and that's outweighing all the practical uses for it. And I think that's a very tricky tightrope to walk. So it's kind of like a little bit more of explaining about what this sentence actually means. You know, I could write a fucking essay on just that, but let's try to keep it a little tighter. And then I think the other huge issue that we run into that obviously goes without saying is this right here. Constant overload of items to action by the developers. New content, bug fixes, pixel art, balancing, translation, you know, apologizing to the community because they have to do it every other week now, it seems. You know, poor communication. And so on from there. And I think that, I know you've probably, if you've listened to any of my stuff before, we're coming back around. All of these things, when you like stack them together, they all, for the most part in business, they point towards a problem with the business itself. Like, we know this business model can be successful. I mean, most of the players playing this game that I have up top, Epic 7, there's not many complaints. You know, most people, the reason they don't stick with it is because they don't like this genre. It's not because of the platform it's on. It's not because of any of the previous things we discussed. It's because they don't like this genre of game. You know, or they play another game that's very similar to this that they're already too invested in to play a second one, right? Those are two completely legitimate reasons, right, to not play it. Brave Exvius has a lot more issues than that, and people leave for a lot more various reasons than that. And I think those things that we've listed here are some of the various reasons. You know, there's more, but most of these are born of things that could be fixed, whether it's behavior, design, communication, and so on. And to get back to the root of the issue about why do we get messages like this? Why do we get bugged stuff every week? You know, when they know it's coming 6 months in advance and so on. It all comes back down to only a few possible factors that are reasonable. Now, again, we don't know. We're not in the space. We don't work for the company, and so on. Okay, but why is the power creep this way? You know, Alum, the company who makes the JP version of the game, if their business model is based around this power creep method and they're going to keep rolling and rolling on it, that's understandable. There's not a lot that Gumi can do about that. But what is under your control if you're Gumi? You know, if you're dealing with this, let's just take where in present day leader skills are coming out. They're all premium priced. People are priced overloaded. Some of them are useless, which is actually good because it gives people time to save. But some of them are right bordered on the line. I think if you're Gumi, what you can do, one of the things you can do, is you can make the premium Abara that just came out. You can make her a damage dealer, as good as she is. You can not make her a premium price tag, and you can not give her the big leader skill. Now, you could give her the big leader skill and be like generous and give people an alternative. And you could give her the big leader skill that matches Dio's leader skill, so that people have a choice. Like, do you want the attacker or the mage that has the same leader skill? Same price, your choice. No, you know, whatever you want to do. That, I think, is a very fair thing that they could have done. But what they did instead was they made her leader skill a little bit better for only mages, which is almost always irrelevant. But then they also made her a great damage dealer for that element. And then they let Dio come out as normal. And, well, a month late, but, you know, we could talk about that as well. I talked about it before. Don't need to revisit it. But, so, those are decisions that somebody is making, okay? Because again, they're not hard locked to bringing in content when they have to bring it in. They're not hard locked to a specific timeline. Do being a month late is proof enough right there. They create a whole separate set of content called Clash of Wills that we play in the game that is not in global, or it's not in JP. There's a whole set of units. We get an extra unit every month that JP doesn't get. Now sometimes they'll get that unit in terms of the art and the sprite and the animations, but they won't get that unit in terms of game mechanics, because the game mechanics in that unit are for that mode that only we play. So the ALIM team will sometimes take that asset that Gumi makes, grab it, and then they'll make it a completely different unit in their version of the game, and then we won't ever get that version of it because we already have our version of it. Okay, so like there's definitely some wiggle room. Okay, if you are Gumi, you can absolutely fix bugs before they get ported into the game. You can absolutely change things around. There's going to be people that say that it can't be done, but that's just complete garbage. They're not coders. Okay, look, I'm not a coder either, but I work with a lot of them, and I worked with a lot of them for a long time. And if I had a 6-month lead and a team of developers that was good at what they did, you can best believe that the patch for this Thursday would be done 2 weeks ago, and it would have been QA tested for a week, and we would have revisited it and made sure that before we launched it, it was as good as it could possibly be. And we definitely wouldn't be making mistakes every single week to the level that this message is about. Okay, one of our end game pieces of content, one of the things that keeps the game afloat by the people that spend the most money, we would definitely not be making mistakes there. If we had to cut corners, it wouldn't be in this place, right? So, you know, um, that's just not a thing. Some people say, oh, well, there's the way the game is coded, and that ALIM sends it to Gumi. They don't have enough time, and this and that. Okay, so why don't they have enough time? Do they not have enough people working on staff? Do they not make enough money off this game to be able to staff the people? Is the company just being greedy and they don't want to put that money back into the game? Reinvestment, redevelopment, things that are essential in any business that creates a product or provides a service. You don't just provide a service for 100 years without tweaking anything about what you do. It just doesn't exist. So that's just like a cop out is really what it is. Okay, and it's important to try to figure out why this is happening, because if you're playing this game and you're investing your time, you deserve to make the best decision that you can possibly make for yourself. And if you don't think the amount of effort that's coming back from the product creators is there for you to be consuming it, then you should move on and do something else. Okay, and this is kind of like where I was building to the entire time. When you compare a mobile game to any other form of entertainment, whether it's live entertainment, comedy, music, sports, whatever, when you compare it to PC gaming, where you can, at least, you can, theoretically, you can copy the files, and as long as you can emulate old versions of Windows, which will probably be around for a long time with software costs and development costs and stuff, you can probably archive everything you need to do. When you buy a physical copy of something, you have it. There's, again, we touched on it before. There's value. There's return. Even when you go to the casino and put all your money on the table and roll the dice, there is a chance you could win your money back and more. Now, are you going to lose it more than often than you're not? Of course you are. But in a game like this, that's all digital, and that exists only online in their servers, and that cannot be preserved in any way unless somebody steals their source code and then like puts up a private server, which in theory could happen, but it doesn't happen with mobile games very often. I mean, it's only going to happen with like cult favorites and like historically amazing online games like EverQuest and City Heroes and shit like that. Like when that is the case, even if people can be tricked by FOMO and when their addiction can be exploited, and when their like parents can steal their or the kids can steal their parents' credit card and all that, that's all limited resources of revenue. If you make a great product that people love, the revenue that you can make off of that product is unlimited. Okay, there are some things that transcend time and generations and value. There's all sorts, like look at like the classic automobile here in the United States. There's a huge market for it. These things go for hundreds of thousands of dollars, and I mean, it's not going to change anytime soon. It's embedded in our culture, right? There's always going to be a market for this old stuff. Now, is there going to be a market for anything made today to be worth something in 20 years? Maybe not, but maybe it speaks more to the quality of some of these old things, the nostalgia that and the good times created around them, that makes them want to be collected. There's plenty of ways to make stuff right now that will be worth a lot in 20, 25 years. But most companies just aren't interested in doing that because they are interested in the short term, the stock price ticking up 1 point tomorrow, even if it's going to drop 100 points the week after. And that's just part of capitalism. It's one of the flaws. But it doesn't stop people from being successful in the way that I just spoke about. There's not a lot of companies out there, but plenty of them that do things the right way, that don't smash the profit ceiling every quarter, but they steadily, consistently make a bunch of revenue, way more than enough to keep the lights on, plenty to pay dividends to their shareholders, and so on and so forth. You know, um, so it can be done. There are plenty of examples of it. Uh, Again, they're outnumbered, but part of that's on us as the consumers. Sometimes you just have to step up and say no to, like, badly run products, or badly maintained products, or poor products. It is what it is. So let's move on to um, you know the types of players in the game. Let's go. So now that we've covered that, I want to just fast forward a little bit. I'm not going to write any of this down because this is way more philosophical than objective. Well, philosophy can be very objective, obviously. That's not the right way to say it. This is more subjective than objective. Okay. But I am the kind of person who likes to take my subjectivity from objectivity and compare it. I think that that's the only way you can stay on track, and it's the only way you can continue to improve those ideas, and so on and so forth. So the way that mobile games work traditionally, and we've all seen the videos and so on and so forth out there, is that most of them are carried by what's known as whales. Okay, so um, whales are you know people who have like a ridiculous amount of resources and like don't care, so that they spend these exorbitant amount of money in the game, and then that kind of like is what sets the bar, or like sets the uppermost cost, for the rest of us, right? So if you go over here to like a bundle, we've been through this before. You see some bundles here for $75, $9. This bundle costs more than Diablo 4 is going to cost. Okay, this one bundle with this finite amount of currency and this or whatever. Now, if a game company can make Diablo 4 and invest, I don't know, like $100 million in it, just random number, and they can sell 100 million copies of it, they make $700 million. They've made 7 times what they've put into it, which is a pretty good payday for the company. Okay, so they've covered their costs, and then they're making 600 million more dollars, right? And that's for a product that maybe took 3 or 4 years to develop, and whatever, however long. But like the cost or whatever would be accounted for. The company will tell you if it was a commercial failure or if it was a commercial success based off what they invested in their earnings calls. These are things you can pay attention to. So but that's a game where everybody has to pay to get it. So everybody's paying $75 or $70 automatically to get in. So if you can sell a bunch of copies, you're good. Gacha games always are free to download, and then they'll have all kinds of stuff like this involved. So most of the people that download, and by most I mean a majority, so 51% or whatever, will at most spend like $1, or maybe spend nothing. Most people spend $1 just so they have a transaction history for account recovery potential in the future in case they lose their account or whatever. But now that you can log in with like Google and all that, it's and stuff, you don't even need to do that really. Um, you just need to be able to recover that account, and then you'll be able to recover any kind of game that you used, account that you used that's associated with. So if you look at just like the money, you're thinking like, wow, if every person who downloaded the game spent $75 on this one single pack, they would be making more money than like the Diablo 4. And why wouldn't every company just vomit out these garbage microtransaction games that would do this? Well, that's exactly what's happening, right? So every game you've probably played in the last 5 or 6 years has just had microtransactions shoveled into it at every point. And that's why there's a million mobile games that all have this exact same system. It's because even if only 10% of the people who ever download your game buy one of these big packs, you've made the same amount of money that it took to develop that big party title that, had a retail cost up front. And then once somebody spends this much money on your game, you get into what's called the sunk cost fallacy, where they're like, well, I'm in for 75. If I want to do the new stuff and I got to spend another 75, I'm just going to go ahead and do it because I've already spent 75. Like, it's predatory, but a lot of people that are willing to go this far in the first place are going to stick around and continue to spend. And those are the whales, right? They, whatever their reason is, but they'll buy one of these every other week, whereas maybe you or I will only be buying maybe a new game once or twice a quarter. We might be buying the Crest Pass once a month, which is like $12. You know, that's equivalent to, say, subscribing to Final Fantasy or World of Warcraft or a streaming service or whatever. It's a reasonable amount of money. Okay, this is more than all of those things put together. So like this is like for the month, if I add them together, like Amazon Prime, Netflix, Hulu, like another streaming service, so like depending on where you live, one that covers all Viacom's products, and then like a sports streaming service on top of that. I have to combine like all those things just to get to this right here. And that's unlimited amount of usage in a month for these products over and over and over. So like you can see like the discrepancy of like, you know, the reason that they have to like rely on gimmicks to get you to buy these things is because if you actually sat down like this and broke it down, you would see that the value for your money is terrible in microtransactions. You're almost always better off with the retail, buy it once, and I own it, and I can play it as much as I want, and so on and so forth. You know, but people get bored quickly and they crave like more stuff, and that's part of the psychology of the gacha, right? Like the reason they're able to do this kind of thing and get away with it is because the people enjoy the thing the first time. They're like, hey, here's this new thing, but you got to pay this much money to get it, and then that's where DLC comes in. And then now, what if DLC was every single week? And then we get down this terrible slide, and then it becomes an avalanche, and then here we are, right? So what games can usually do to cut through this and to keep these top level players spending is they can supplement a very decent free to play or very, very small amount of money to play experience to a much wider array of people. And then those people in the game with the big spenders in the game will continue the big spenders' motivation to continue spending. Because if you're spending big at a casino and you're at the table by yourself, the chances of you winning the money are pretty much the same. Depends on what game you're playing, but if you're playing any game of chance like roulette or dice or whatever, your chance to win does not go down or up by how many people are betting. Okay, but when you're playing a game like this, a mobile game, if there's only 20 people playing Final Fantasy Brave Exvius, and you spend $1,000 a month on the game, and you have no community to interact with or people that are also playing it with you to like show them like what you're doing and so on, that's an artificial cap on the hedonism that you're going to get out of the product. Again, like how much fun is it really? If it's $1,000 a month and it's that much fun, well, by all means, like get in there. I mean, you could literally buy a sports car for that and have a ton of fun doing that instead. But your sports car might be something that like 20 of your friends will never have the time to check out. Like they won't have the time to come over and take a ride or whatever. But an online game, when they're stuck at work, you can be chatting on it, and like you can send each other messages about, oh yeah, I pulled this, or oh yeah, I just defeated this trial, and like this is my strategy. And that social part of it is what usually will pull the whales in, or like some kind of thing where like we go back to the PvP element. Like as long as there's people to beat up with my Diablo Immortal like super gear, it's all well and good. But as soon as I like don't have anybody else playing the game, and all my stuff is useless because I don't have anybody to attack anymore, or whatever the scenario is, that's where you fall off, right? And players will start, the whales, the people who actually supplement the game and make the game super profitable, will start to fall off. So really, you do need, in almost every scenario, a baseline experience that's good enough without a ridiculous amount of money being spent in order to create the community around which the whales of the game will stick with the game. And this is a very, very difficult thing to balance, as we've been speaking about. And then there's some players that fall in the middle that spend a little bit here, spend a little bit there. I've been a dolphin in some games here and there, but never really to that level. Like, oh, I did well at the casino last weekend and I won like $200. I'll spend 50 of it on Brave Exvius. Like that's about as far as I've ever gone. You know, in terms of investing, like long term, I'm into like something that's like more tangible. Like that I can actually like head up to a store or pawn shop or something and flip. Whether that's collectibles or you know, um, you know, of any kind. Maybe it's records, maybe it's magic cards, maybe it's stamps, coins, watches, even. Like whatever, something tangible that I could actually turn around if needed. If emergencies arose. That's where I would actually, or I buy stocks or bonds or whatever. I'd invest in my retirement accounts and stuff like that. That's where I would actually spend money. Typically, if a game was coming out that I really wanted to buy, I would definitely not be spending any money on Brave Exvius in that month or even in that quarter. That's where my money would go. But then I would find myself in a place where, okay, yeah, like I would normally buy like a $50 or $60 retail title sometime this spring, right? But nothing came out this spring that I even am remotely interested in. And the Steam sale just passed, and I didn't want anything from there. So, oh yeah, I play this Brave Exvius game, you know, 2 or 3 hours a day sometimes. Maybe some days only 30 minutes, but I've been having fun with it. So maybe I'll slide them at $20 and just buy something that's cosmetic and looks cooler, or maybe it's like some extra energy or whatever like that we buy in this game. So that experience has to be there, or your whales will eventually not have a reason to continue to spend because there will be no community, there will be no social aspect around your game, and I've never seen a game where it's so good single player that people are willing to spend 100 to 150 to $200 or more a month to continue to have the right to play it. Okay, that is something that is not like you have to be either addicted and making bad decisions, or it's got to be something that's like incredible, right? Like it's got to be so cool. And even then, like when I was talking about buying that car, you're not going to have that payment for forever. There's still a finite cost. It's not in perpetuity. Eventually you'll pay it off, and then all of a sudden you'll own the thing, and you can enjoy it as long as it lasts. And you can invest further into it and make sure it lasts even longer. And that's a choice that you set the price on. Like you decide how much you want to put in. So, yeah, this ecosystem that gets built is oftentimes not even understood by the people making the apps, and that's why you see a lot of games. They get to the second, third, fourth anniversary, and then they die off because this ecosystem was not able to be maintained by the company that made the game, right? And I feel that unfortunately for Brave Exvius and for some of the other games that Square produces, a lot of these games are surviving off of the IP that we talked about before, the beloved IP. Like if this game wasn't Final Fantasy, didn't have Final Fantasy characters in it, how many of us would have found this game? I don't know. That's a very, very difficult question to ask. I really feel like there's a lot of whales in this game. Well, I mean, not period, but a lot of the whales are in this game because they love Final Fantasy in some aspect or another. Okay? So I very seriously doubt somebody's just like a mobile game fiend and found this game and decided to whale out in this game. Because, quite frankly, like, it's very, very different from your traditional mobile games with units and RPG elements, like the one I'm showing you here, right? Most games are build a team of 3 or 4 things, take it into some content, do a battle, repeat over and over. You can't close the app. It's turn based, but there's like a speed rating, whereas in FFB, everybody takes a turn, then the enemy takes a turn in this. This is much more of an active style ATB system, with a lot of these games where, you'll do a mission and like, okay, well, it's the game's now, the emulator's flipping out on me now, but I don't know what's going on, if we're just like too much memory's been cached or something. Here, let me try to reboot it real quick. Let's do this. Actually, let's load up this other game I was going to show you guys. And I kind of want to close with this anyway. Just giving you an example of a game that was much older. Probably this was the first like gacha that I actually played that I was semi-serious about. So let me go ahead and load this up real quick. And I mentioned it already. It's called Summoner's War. I don't play anymore. I still have friends that do, but it's like I think it's like 9 years old now, and they've had some big crossovers like Street Fighter. I think there's like an Assassin's Creed crossover right now, and it's much more limited in terms of like how often they release new units into the game, and they actually don't even release content into the game all that much either. New content is very there we go. New content is very limited. It's very rare that something new comes out, but when it does, like it kind of breathes new life into the game. Like there's whole new units that may be useful now, right? And they have it's a much more of a common thing that you're going to see. So they have like a element system. So, but instead of having 8 different elements, they have 5, and there's like an elemental triangle, and then there's like an elemental double weakness, double advantage. So pretty much every mobile unit based game follows this similar structure. But what they do is they make every single unit in the game is able to be all 5 elements. So imagine if like there was a Squall in BE, but there were 8 versions of Squall, and each one was a different element, and it had different abilities and different synergies with different units. That's where they have the that's like the main difference in the units in this game. And also, there is no step up. You can't guarantee a summon for anything. You're always going to be pulling something random. And what that does is it kind of forces you to play the game with what you have and work towards more pulls and more pulls, and eventually you get some of the more top tier stuff, and you'll start using that to clear stuff that's more difficult. But then you'll get more resources to come back, and you'll be able to upgrade your older, weaker base units. So like imagine right now if you could take a 5-star base unit, or actually a 6-star base unit, right, that doesn't even have a 7-star upgrade, and you could go back and you could upgrade that all the way to NVA and have it be the best in class for like 1 or 2 of the different trials that are in the game right now. That's where a lot of other games have a massive advantage on BE, and you get a lot more casual people spending a little bit of money as opposed to a ton of whales. Now you're still going to have your whales, but you're going to have a lot more people spending money in this game in a casual way, because the pool of stuff is not being power crept out every single week, right? So that is a huge advantage, and it's a much better experience to keep people who can't afford to spend $1,000 a month to continue playing the game, not pick up something different, and then when they do have that extra couple bucks, like I just mentioned, to throw it towards this app instead of something else. And I really feel like all these things combined together, the constant poor communication, the the misunderstanding of how to effectively pick the right way to run the business model, that we're not power creeping units every 2 or 3 months. Now, is it boring to use the same 3 units to clear everything? Of course it is. But some people can't afford to be buying lapis, especially at such a crappy rate. Like this is like one of the worst. Honestly, this is like one of the worst currency to dollar ratios that I've ever seen. Because like if you don't buy these FOMO bundles that are finite, and you go to like the actual purchase lapis thing here, 18k by itself with no bonuses is $100, and like this pack we just looked at that was $25 cheaper was only 2,000 less, and it had extra shit in it. So like they really, and this is a common tactic, what they do is they put the base price so stinking high that when you see these bundles you feel like you're getting a good deal, but in reality almost nobody buys the base price. Literally no one buys the base price. It's just there to trick you into overspending for this, right? And it's just microtransaction gacha 101. But we all know that, and I'm going to assume that most people out there are intelligent and they know this. But when you get to the point where like the game is literally forcing you down this path to keep up with stuff, it gets a little unnerving, especially if that stuff is not being executed well, if it's bugged, if it's constantly broken, if it's not interesting. And then you get back to the top content in the game. How are you going to convince whales to keep spending their huge amounts of money when not only does this mode that is specifically designed for them have tons of issues that like are very difficult for them to actually squash and like have things executed properly. And then also when you come out and say that we fixed this, but it's not fixed, and anybody who spends the amount of money on this game that actually cares is going to know that this is untrue. You're just going to upset them even further, you know. And I hate to say this, but for every like multi-millionaire that maybe might casually play this game, you're going to have people that just are middle income or high to middle income that have decent jobs, but they don't have anything else to spend their money on. Like I mentioned, they're not interested in other video games. Maybe they have, you know, some other hobbies, but, you know, they don't, um, you know, do all this other stuff. And then they won't actually, you know, have any motivation to continue to spend. So like, not only are you gonna, you know, like reduce the experience for lower end players, but you're also going to take this mode that's specifically designed for the higher end players. You're going to let people cheat in it. You're not going to fix the problems, and then you're going to expect them to pull on 3, 4, 5 premium units in a row. I just think that it's very, very foolish, and it's not a good business decision. You know, it's going to erode the player base, and you know, like I mentioned, I'm not taking questions or whatever. A question just popped up, or like a thing just popped up. I'll comment it maybe after we're done recording this, but you know, I think that whether or not you agree or disagree with me, mobile games die all the time, and they don't die because they were doing great and then all of a sudden something happened and the studio blew up where they made the game. Okay, people stop spending. The content's not good enough for people to invest in it, and then once those people in the mid tier and the low tier drop off, the whales are just with themselves. And sometimes games will maintain, you know, a decent following for a year or two after that. But then inevitably those whales will be like, well, there's only like 20 of us and it's just the whales left and there's no one else here. Why am I even, you know, into this? And these kind of things are like what snowballs into the avalanches of, you know, games dying. So as much as like I'm not really affected by Dark Vision's problems, I'm also not so naive to think that the game as a whole will not be affected by this. And the players who spend a lot of money, as much as I don't agree with them doing it, I understand that the reason some of these games exist is because that they do. Now, I think it would be great if players, you know, obviously completely adjusted the way they play, and then we would get games where the prices weren't so high because no one was paying them. You're obviously not going to make a product that doesn't return, and then you know, we would go from there. But that's not reality. Reality is we are where we are, right? So if you want a game that you enjoy to survive, you're going to need whales to carry the load for the most part, you know, if you're not one yourself. And I don't see how making things worse for them or like invalidating their hard work and their purchases is ever going to lead you in the right direction. Now, maybe you're not capable of fixing the problem, but I think you go a lot further than to, you know, be clear and concise with the communication, let them know you're having problems. And I think that honesty will buy you a lot more time and patience from the community. Whales are not, and stuff like this is just not the way to do it. You know, and the reason we talked about so much of this other stuff, you know, we defined a lot of these things before we got to this point where we're talking about issues with the game and what could be potentially happen in the future. You know, the reason we did all that is because, you know, an argument from experience is not really useful. Okay. The reason I talked about all this stuff and I talked about other games and so on is because my opinion in a vacuum doesn't do anything, right? I'm giving you observations about the genre as a whole of microtransaction games. A bigger view of up top view of like gaming in general. We talked about platforms for a reason, you know, obviously accessibility is a factor. So when you talk about all those things to try to understand how the stack builds, right? And if the stack builds too high, your product will fail. And, you know, I think that when you see things happening where in other games the stack has been built and then they fail, you start to get uneasy, right? You start to lose confidence. And especially last week and this week, I've been losing confidence in the product for a while. I really hope it turns around. But I'm also, you know, not so naive as to like, think that, um, this is only happening to us. I mean, this happens to everybody playing every mobile game at some point or another. Even the games like the one that's up above me right here that's 9 years old will eventually shut down. There's nothing. There's no way to keep something purely digital sustainable forever. It just doesn't happen. World of Warcraft will one day end service. It might not be for another 10 years, but it one day will end service. It is fully digital. It's inevitable. There is no real world value to it. You know, will it be kept alive, like I mentioned, through like a private server? Of course it will be. There will be archivists that do their due diligence and like, preserve it in some manner. But it won't be something that companies support and actively develop to make money. And that's what drives all the innovation, right? Like you can love making video games, but if you can't make a salary that you can buy a house with and survive off of making video games, you're going to have to find something else to do. That's just the way it goes. This is basic, basic social interaction and, macroeconomics. So it is what it is there. But I hope that this was like a more kind of nuanced take, like on like what's going on with the game, why people are upset about this kind of thing. And I hope that like this kind of gave people a better perspective, like of what's going on, and why people are so upset about this, including people who aren't whales. I think one of the weird things in the last week especially has been like, why is the community so upset about people cheating in dark visions? It doesn't matter. Well, you can say that, but that's a very, very unnuanced take. It's not accounting for any of the things that we've talked about today, and it's not accounting for any of the things that will happen in the future. And that kind of carelessness and like saying, hey, developer, hey, publisher, go ahead and do whatever you need to do. I don't really care. Don't be surprised when your game shut down the next month. You have to do what little you can do to keep things going in products like this. And I think not having the support and the backing for the players to carry the load that make sure that this game is still playable, I think it's just a short-sighted and bad decision. You know, and I think that's why a player like me who doesn't ever get top 1,000 in Dark Visions um, can be just as upset about a whale who got screwed out of their top 100 because they let cheaters cheat and they're not going to fix it. And they're not going to really deter it. And then they're going to say, hey, this issue's fixed, and we already know it isn't fixed. We have screenshots that show that it's not fixed. I mean, they fixed one path to it, but they did not actually fix the real issue. So there you go. So this was a really long one, but I thought it was cool to write this stuff out and then, make this kind of like almost a primer. Like if you want to learn more about like games, the business of them, or like not even learn about them, but like maybe kind of adjust the way you form your opinion because you're not taking into account all these other subtle things. Like I even gave Gumi the benefit of the doubt in the beginning, explaining like this is probably not their fault. This is also probably not their fault. However, they're still like this. I can show you how they're not doing what they need to do, or they're making poor decisions and then throwing their hands up like, oh, I don't know why people aren't spending as much or whatever. And no, I mean, all that stuff is easily, like verifiable. You just have to look at the data and, not look through it. You have to look at it. So we'll probably do like a state of the game at some time before anniversary, and then maybe like did anniversary do enough to like kind of like turn the game around, I think. We'll see. But this one's probably already long enough as it is, right? So I'm going to go ahead and clip this here. If you watch this on YouTube and you sat through all 2.5 hours of it, thank you. I don't make any money off of any of this. I never will. I never plan to. At least not off my own content. If somebody offers me a job down the line to be on social media or streaming or whatever, I mean, I'd have to think about it, of course, but I would never put on ads or anything like that to any of this stuff because I want to make sure that people understand that this is not paid for. Like my opinions are my own. I try to even explain how I got there. I think that's like the only way you can do it and maintain actual ethics. So, I'm going to clip this here. If you checked it out on YouTube, thanks a lot. You can follow the link down below to come over and watch it live on Twitch, where we do the show every Wednesday, and then we do some other streams and things like that. Some of them gets exported to YouTube, and some of it doesn't. This show always gets exported. Some content will get exported here and there. And then, if you want to check that out live, please come follow me over there. But again, I will never move into the affiliate or partner program there. It would completely restrict me in terms of service. So if you like honest stuff like this and measured stuff like this, that's the least I can do to make sure that I can continue to deliver it. So thanks everybody for tuning in this week. And here's to hoping that things start looking up soon, and that Gumi gets more active, and that the common player and the whale alike will have a better experience as we move forward. All right. So we'll see you guys on the next one.